I never thought I'd end up back in Montana, working on my uncle's farm for the summer, but here I was at 24, burned out from 3 years of corporate marketing in Seattle, standing in a barn that smelled like hay and old wood and something I couldn't quite name, but somehow felt like home. My Uncle Pete called it divine intervention when I showed up on his doorstep in May. I called it a breakdown disguised as a quarter-life crisis. Either way, I was here, and that's how I met Finn. He was already working when I arrived that first morning, moving bales of hay like they weighed nothing, his faded blue t-shirt dark with sweat across his shoulders. I noticed his hands first, broad and calloused, the kind of hands that knew real work. Then he turned around, and I saw his face, sun-weathered and honest, with these impossibly green eyes that seemed to look right through all my carefully constructed walls. He smiled, just a small quirk of his mouth, and said, "You must be Pete's nephew. I'm Finn. Hope you're ready to actually work out here." There was no malice in it, just a statement of fact, and something about his directness made me want to prove myself in a way I hadn't felt in years. Those first few weeks were brutal. My hands blistered, my back ached in places I didn't know could ache, and I fell into bed each night, too exhausted to even scroll through my phone. But Finn was patient with me, showing me how to properly lift the feed bags, how to check the irrigation lines, how to read the sky for weather changes. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words mattered. He'd point out a hawk circling overhead, or mention that the wheat was coming in early this year, and I found myself hanging on every syllable, learning to appreciate the quiet poetry in his observations. I started noticing things I shouldn't have been noticing. The way his jaw tensed when he was concentrating on fixing a fence post. The sound of his laugh, rare and genuine, when one of the barn cats did something ridiculous. How he always made sure I took water breaks, even when I insisted I was fine. The particular shade of gold his hair turned in the late afternoon sun. I told myself I was just appreciating having a friend out here, someone who made the isolation feel less heavy. I told myself a lot of things that weren't quite true. One evening in late June, we were finishing up for the day, sitting on the tailgate of his truck and watching the sunset paint the fields in shades of amber and rose. Finn handed me a beer from the cooler he kept in the truck bed, and our fingers brushed. It lasted maybe a second, but I felt it everywhere, this electric current that made my breath catch. He didn't seem to notice, just took a long drink and said, "You're getting better at this. When you first showed up, I didn't think you'd last a week." I asked him why he didn't say anything, and he smiled that small smile again. "Figured you needed to prove something to yourself. We all got our reasons for being out here." I wanted to ask him what his reasons were, but something in his expression told me he wasn't ready to share that yet. So instead, I asked about his life, and slowly, over the course of that hour, he opened up. He'd grown up 2 towns over, studied agriculture at Montana State, had plans to run his own ranch someday. He talked about the land with such reverence, such deep connection, that I found myself envious of that kind of certainty. I'd spent my whole adult life chasing things I thought I wanted, only to feel empty when I got them. Finn knew exactly who he was and what mattered to him. It was the most attractive thing I'd ever encountered, though I wasn't ready to admit that to myself yet. July brought heat that shimmered off the fields in waves, and the work shifted to early mornings and late evenings to avoid the worst of it. That meant more time with Finn in the golden hours, and I was losing my ability to pretend I didn't feel something shifting between us. Or maybe it was just shifting in me. I'd catch myself staring at the back of his neck when he bent to check the equipment, at the way his forearms flexed when he hauled wire fencing, at his profile against the endless Montana sky. I'd had crushes before, awkward, confused feelings in high school that I'd buried under girlfriends and denial. But this was different. This felt inevitable, like a storm you could see coming from miles away but couldn't escape. We developed a rhythm, an unspoken partnership, where we anticipated each other's movements. He'd reach for a tool, and I'd already be handing it to him. I'd struggle with something, and he'd appear at my elbow, not taking over, but just offering his steady presence. Pete noticed, made some comment about us working like we'd been doing this together for years instead of weeks. Finn just shrugged, but I saw something flicker across his face, something I couldn't quite read. The night everything changed started ordinary enough. We'd worked late repairing a section of the barn roof, and a summer storm rolled in faster than expected. Rain hammered the metal roof, and we took shelter in the barn's upper loft, surrounded by the smell of dry hay and the sound of thunder rolling across the valley. We were both soaked, and Finn grabbed a couple of old blankets from the storage chest, tossing one to me. We sat there, backs against hay bales, watching lightning illuminate the fields through the loft door. Finn spoke first, his voice quiet under the rain's percussion. "Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer." I told him to go ahead, my heart already beating faster. "Why'd you really come out here? Pete said you had some fancy job in Seattle, whole life set up. Doesn't make sense giving that up to shovel shit and mend fences." I was silent for a long moment, trying to find words for feelings I'd barely acknowledged to myself. Finally, I told him the truth, that I'd been living someone else's idea of success, that every day felt like wearing a costume that didn't fit, that I'd wake up in my downtown apartment and feel absolutely nothing, that I came out here because I needed to remember what it felt like to be real. He nodded slowly, like that made perfect sense to him. Then he said something that stopped my breath. "I get that. I came back here 3 years ago for kind of the same reason. Spent 2 years in Denver working for an agricultural company, dating this guy who wanted me to be someone I wasn't. Took me way too long to figure out that pretending to be okay with city life was killing me. So I came home." The words hung in the air between us. Dating this guy. So casual, so matter-of-fact, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe I was the only one who'd been tearing myself apart over it. I asked him if it was hard, being back in a small town, being himself. He considered the question, taking his time like he always did. "Sometimes. But I'd rather be lonely and honest than comfortable and fake. Pete knows. Most of the folks around here either know or suspect, and the ones who have a problem with it don't hire me. Works itself out." He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and in the lightning flash I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tight. "What about you, Adrian? You figuring out who you are out here?" I should have deflected. I should have made a joke or changed the subject. Instead, I heard myself say, "I think I'm figuring out that I've been lying to myself for a long time." My voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly I was talking, everything spilling out. About the confusion I'd felt since high school, the relationships with women that felt like going through motions, the way I'd convinced myself that the emptiness was just about my career, about how coming here was supposed to be about escaping work stress, but instead it was unraveling every lie I'd told myself about who I was supposed to be. Finn listened without interrupting, his presence solid and steady beside me. When I finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That takes guts, admitting that. Took me until I was 25 to stop running from it." He paused, and I could feel him choosing his next words carefully. "For what it's worth, the person you've been out here these past 2 months, that seems pretty real to me. Guy who works hard, who actually listens when people talk, who gives a damn about doing things right. That's not nothing." Something broke open in my chest, some dam I'd been holding against a flood of feeling. I turned to him, and he was already looking at me, and the air between us felt charged with more than just the storm's electricity. I asked him if he ever got scared being honest about who he was. He smiled, sad and understanding. Every damn day. But you know what's scarier? Waking up at 40 and realizing you never lived your actual life, that you spent it all pretending. The rain softened to a steady drum, and we sat there in the darkness, shoulders touching, and I felt more seen than I'd ever felt in my life. Finn shifted slightly, and his hand was right there next to mine in the hay, and before I could overthink it, I moved my pinky to touch his. Just that small point of contact, barely anything, but it felt like jumping off a cliff. He didn't move away. Instead, he turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine, his palm rough and warm against mine, and squeezed once. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. We stayed like that until the storm passed, holding hands in the dark barn loft like teenagers, and it was the most honest thing I'd ever done. When the rain finally stopped, Finn stood and pulled me up with him, but he didn't let go of my hand right away. He looked at me with those green eyes and said, "We should probably talk about this, but maybe when we're not exhausted and soaked through." I agreed, and he smiled, a real full smile I'd never seen before, and it transformed his whole face. Then he squeezed my hand once more and let go, and we climbed down from the loft and headed to our respective places, and I lay awake all night, replaying every moment, every word, every touch. The next few days were a strange dance of normalcy and tension. We worked together like always, but now there was this awareness humming between us, every accidental touch loaded with meaning. Finn would hand me something and our fingers would brush, and I'd see his jaw tighten. I'd look up and catch him watching me, and he wouldn't look away, just hold my gaze until I felt heat rise in my face. We were circling something, both of us knowing it was inevitable, but neither quite ready to be the first to dive in. Pete definitely noticed something was different. At dinner one night, he looked between us and said, "You two have a fight or something? Awful quiet." Finn and I exchanged a glance, and I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "No fight," Finn said. "Just tired." Pete grunted, unconvinced, but let it drop. After dinner, Finn caught my arm as I was heading out and said, "Walk with me?" We ended up at the creek that ran along the property's eastern edge, the water low and lazy in the summer heat. We sat on the bank, and for a while neither of us spoke, just listened to the water and the evening birds. Finally, Finn said, "I've been thinking about the other night, about what you said, what I said." He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "I don't want to push you into anything. You're still figuring stuff out, and that's okay. But I need you to know that I'm interested in you. Have been since about week 2, if I'm being honest." My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. I told him I was interested too, that I hadn't been able to think about anything else, but that I was scared because I'd never done this before. Never let myself even consider it as a real possibility. He nodded like he expected that. "We can go slow, we've got time. I'm not going anywhere, and it sounds like you're planning to stick around for a while." He looked at me then, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "I just need to know if this is something you want to explore or if I should back off and keep things professional." I reached out and took the stone from his hands, letting my fingers trail across his palm, and said, "I want to explore it. I'm terrified, but I want to." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath, and smiled. "Okay then." Then he stood and offered me his hand, and when I took it, he pulled me up and into him, and we stood there chest to chest, his arms loose around my waist, and I could feel his heart beating as fast as mine. He said, "Is this okay?" And I nodded, not trusting my voice. We stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other in the fading light, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Our first kiss happened 3 days later, and it was nothing like I'd imagined. We were in the equipment shed, and I was handing him a wrench, and our hands touched, And suddenly we were just looking at each other, and the air felt thick with all the wanting we'd been carefully containing. Finn set the wrench down slowly, never breaking eye contact, and said, "I really want to kiss you right now." I barely got out "yes" before his hand was on my jaw, tilting my face up, and then his lips were on mine, soft and sure and tasting like the coffee we'd had at lunch. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of us learning this new language. Then I made some sound I didn't know I could make, and something shifted. His hand slid into my hair, and I grabbed his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that made my knees weak. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine and laughed, breathless and amazed. "Holy shit," he whispered, and I couldn't help but laugh too, giddy and overwhelmed and more alive than I'd ever felt. After that, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. Stolen kisses in the barn, holding hands when we were sure Pete wasn't around, Finn's arm around my shoulders as we sat on his truck tailgate watching the stars. He was patient with my nervousness, never pushing, letting me set the pace. We'd make out like teenagers, and when I'd pull back, overwhelmed, he'd just kiss my forehead and hold me until I felt steady again. He made me feel safe in a way I'd never experienced, like I could be uncertain and scared and still be wanted. One night in early August, we were at his place, a small cabin he rented about 10 miles from Pete's farm. We were on his couch, tangled together, and I pulled back to look at him, really look at him. I told him I thought I was falling in love with him, and I watched his expression soften into something so tender it made my chest ache. He cupped my face in both hands and said, "I'm already there, have been for weeks." Then he kissed me like I was precious, like I mattered, and I felt something in me finally settle into place, some fundamental piece of myself I'd been missing my whole life. We talked that night about what this meant, about the future. I'd been planning to go back to Seattle at summer's end, but now that felt impossible. How could I leave this, leave him, leave the person I was becoming out here? Finn said he didn't want to be the reason I gave up my life, that I needed to be sure about what I wanted. But I was sure, maybe for the first time ever. I didn't want my old life. I wanted mornings that smelled like coffee and hay, work that left me tired in a satisfying way, evenings with this man who saw me and wanted me anyway. I called my boss the next week and quit, called my landlord and broke my lease. My parents didn't understand, thought I was throwing away my career, but I didn't know how to explain that I was actually finding my life. Pete was thrilled, offered me a permanent position managing the farm's operations. Finn and I started making plans, talking about the ranch he wanted to start, about building something together. The town gossip mill eventually figured out that Finn and I were more than just co-workers. Some people had opinions about it, but most folks didn't care, and the ones who did weren't people whose opinions mattered to me. Finn's friend Sarah, who ran the feed store, hugged me the first time she saw us together in town and said, "About damn time. Finn's been moping around for years. Good to see him happy." By September, I'd fully moved into Finn's cabin, and we fell into a domestic rhythm that felt startling in its rightness. Cooking dinner together, falling asleep tangled up in each other, waking to his kisses and the Montana sunrise. He told me once, as we lay in bed on a Sunday morning, that I made the work feel lighter, that coming home to me was the best part of his day. I told him he made me feel brave enough to be myself, that loving him was the easiest thing I'd ever done. We're planning the ranch now, looking at properties, dreaming about what we'll build together. It's hard work and uncertain finances and a future that doesn't look anything like what I once imagined for myself. But when I'm out in the fields with Finn, when he looks at me and smiles, that smile that's just for me, when he takes my hand and says something about the land or the sky or our plans, I know with absolute certainty that this is my life, not the one I was supposed to want, but the one I actually do. the one where I'm finally, completely, honestly myself. I came to Montana running from a life that didn't fit, and I found Finn, found myself, found a love I didn't know existed. He was right that night in the barn. The scariest thing isn't being honest about who you are. It's the thought of never living your real life. And this, right here, working beside the man I love, building something real and solid and true, this is my real life, and it's more beautiful than anything I could have imagined.